So, we're diving into Georges Lakhovsky today. And, he had some pretty out there ideas about the human body being, like, way more electric than we usually think.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, back in the early 20th century, he was already way ahead of the curve on that.
Yeah, this Russian scientist, he got, like, completely fascinated by all these mysteries in biology. Like, how do animals just know stuff?
Especially, like, how they navigate over crazy long distances. That really grabbed him.
Right, like those carrier pigeons that find their way home from, like, hundreds of miles away.
Or birds migrating across entire oceans, right? How do they do this?
What's guiding them?
Exactly. And, Lakhovsky wasn't buying the usual explanations about instinct.
He wanted something more concrete, something measurable.
Yeah, more scientific.
So then electromagnetism enters the picture.
Right, because he started making these connections.
Yeah.
Like, he noticed pigeons getting totally disoriented near those big radio towers.
And he's thinking, wait a minute, are those electromagnetic waves messing with their internal compass or something?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he wasn't just observing, he actually did experiments, released pigeons near those active radio transmitters.
And
Total confusion. Couldn't figure out which way was up, but as soon as the transmission stopped, bam, they got the bearings back, flew straight home.
wow, that is a pretty strong observation. So then what was his big takeaway from that?
So he proposed that all living things, not just pigeons, are constantly emitting and receiving these ultra-short wavelength radiations.
Whoa, okay, so like we're all little walking radio stations?
Kind of. And Lakhovsky thought these radiations, they're the key to how life itself works. Not just instinct, but like everything.
Okay, so we're broadcasting and receiving, even if we don't realize it. I read he even did some experiments to test this out, something about a duck.
Oh, yeah. So he was really into birds and how they might be using this, like electromagnetism, to figure out where they are and what's around them. So he measured the static electricity generated by, get this, just shaking a duck's wing.
Wait, so just flapping their wings creates actual electricity? I had no idea.
It's pretty cool, right? And for Lakhovsky, it was a big piece of the puzzle. Friction against the air, it creates these electrical charges. And he linked that to something called the Earth's atmospheric potential.
Atmospheric what now?
Basically, it's the difference in electrical charge between the Earth's surface and way up high in the atmosphere.
Okay.
And the higher you go, the stronger that charge gets.
Oh, so birds being higher up, they're in like a more electrically charged zone.
You got it.
Ah.
And then you add the electricity they're generating themselves just by flapping their wings. Lakhovsky's thinking they're basically like little biological antennas.
So they're tapping into this natural electrical grid as they fly. That could explain how they migrate. It's like an electrical connection to the Earth.
It's a super interesting idea, right?
Yeah, it's blown my mind a little.
And this wasn't just about birds for Lakhovsky. He thought this applied to all living things. And he took it even further, down to the tiniest level. The cell.
So how do you connect electricity to like the way cells work?
So here comes his most radical idea. The cell is like a tiny little electromagnetic resonator. It can emit and absorb these high-frequency radiations.
He's saying that each cell is basically a little electrical circuit.
Basically. He thought the cell's structure, the nucleus, all those filaments, the membrane, they all act like components in a tiny oscillator.
Wow. I've always thought of cells as these little chemical factories.
Yeah.
But this is like a whole other level, a microscopic world of like electrical signals and vibrations.
And this oscillation, Lakhovsky believed, this is what makes life life. It's fueled by like cosmic rays and energy from within the cell itself.
That is so wild for the early 1900s. Was there any science backing him up at the time?
Well, there was some interesting stuff happening around then. Scientists had found these things called mitogenetic rays.
Mitogenetic rays sounds intense.
They're like super weak ultraviolet radiation, and living cells give them off, especially plants.
Okay.
Hard to detect back then, but their discovery kind of lined up with what Lakhovsky was saying about cells and radiation.
So even though his methods were a bit basic, it's like he was predicting bioelectromagnetics, right? That whole field of how electromagnetic fields mess with living things.
You got it. He was way ahead of his time in seeing how important electromagnetism is to biology. And he went even further. He started thinking about like where all this energy comes from. He called it, get this, universion.
Universion. Okay, now we're getting into sci-fi territory.
Maybe, but for Lakhovsky, this was a real thing, like a web of radiation all throughout the universe, constantly influencing life.
And he tied that to those newly discovered cosmic rays, right? Like that was the fuel for all this cellular activity.
That's right. And he even thought that disruptions in these cosmic rays, like from sunspots, could mess things up and maybe even cause disease.
So like storms on the sun can give us the flu.
Not exactly, but he was thinking along those lines, yeah. That we're all part of this cosmic energy flow, and even distant events can have an effect on us.
Okay, that's a lot to process. But I know Lakhovsky had some, shall we say, interesting ideas about cancer too.
Oh yeah, this is where things get really controversial.
Like those carcinogenic soils he talked about. The idea that where you live could actually like make you more likely to get cancer.
Exactly. We can dive into that next time.
So we've been talking about Lakhovsky's idea that our cells are like little radio receivers picking up on this universion energy. But how does that all tie back to disease, especially cancer?
Yeah, his cancer theories, those are some of his most thought-provoking ones. He was sure these cellular oscillations, when they get messed up, that's at the heart of a lot of illnesses.
Okay.
He even compared cancer cells to, like, microbes, saying they both throw off the balance, the normal oscillation of healthy cells.
So it's like a cancer cell is a rogue radio station, blasting out the wrong frequency and jamming up the body's communication system.
That's a great way to put it. He even did these experiments with, like, typhoid and coli bacteria, hitting them with an electrical current. And guess what? They separated. Like, the two types of bacteria literally moved apart, showing they had different electrical properties. Lakhovsky thought, okay, that typhoid, with its different frequency, it could disrupt how healthy cells are supposed to vibrate, and bam, you get sick.
Wow. It's crazy to think something so tiny could have that kind of electrical power. Didn't he also think aging itself plays a role in cancer?
Oh, definitely. He figured as we get older, our tissues change chemically, like metals build up, and that can mess with the electrical balance of cells.
So our cells are like these perfectly tuned little circuits, but they get rusty over time.
Yeah, they get out of whack, and suddenly we're more open to disease. It makes you think about all the electromagnetic stuff from technology we're surrounded by these days.
Right, like our phones, Wi-Fi, everything.
Lakhovsky would have a field day with all that. But it brings us back to how he thought we could actually treat illness. He wasn't just about explaining how it worked. He wanted to fix it.
And that's where his invention, the radiocellular oscillator, comes in, right? It's wild he was messing with these ideas way before things like bioelectromagnetics were even a thing.
Total pioneer. I mean, his methods might seem simple now, but those basic principles are still relevant today. This whole idea that electromagnetic fields can affect living things is getting more and more support from science.
He was onto something, even if it was way ahead of his time. And I know he was super interested in cosmic rays, like how they could be good A&D, bad for us.
Oh yeah, cosmic rays were huge for Lakhovsky. Part of that universion idea, he thought they were like the basic energy source that makes cells oscillate.
Okay.
But too much or the wrong kind of cosmic rays, that's where things go wrong.
I remember he even connected them to sunspots and how they affect us here on Earth.
You got it. He looked at data on solar activity, like all sorts of stuff. Earthquakes, cyclones, even how plants grow, and human behavior.
Hold up, sunspots can affect, like, how we act.
Well, he thought so. He proposed that those disruptions from sunspots, they throw off the balance in living things, and that could lead to all kinds of issues.
Whoa, okay.
Yeah.
So we're all swimming in the sea of cosmic energy, and a little solar storm can mess up our day.
Pretty much. He was really big on how everything's connected, like literally everything. Speaking of connections, remember those geranium experiments he did for his cancer theories?
Oh, yeah. What was that all about?
He was really into plants, wanted to see how his theories applied to them too. So he took these geraniums and gave them a type of bacteria that causes tumors.
Like cancer.
Yep, and nasty stuff. It killed all the plants he didn't treat.
So it was pretty aggressive.
Big time. But get this, the ones he did treat with those oscillating circuits of his, or even just a simple copper spiral around them. They didn't just get better, they thrived, grew way bigger than the regular plants.
Wait, so just a copper spiral did that? That sounds like some kind of old wives' tale, not actual science.
I know, right? But that's Lakhovsky for you. Science mixed with this intuition about energy. He thought that copper spiral acted like an antenna,
Oh, okay.
picking up those electromagnetic fields, even cosmic rays, and changing them just enough to help the plant cells get back in sync.
So the copper spiral was like retuning them to the right frequency.
Exactly. And they bounce back, strong as ever. It really supports his whole thing about oscillation and resonance being central to, like, whether we get sick or stay healthy.
That's a pretty powerful image. But what about those carcinogenic soils? Like, is that really a thing? Can the ground make you sick?
It's definitely worth thinking about. Lakhovsky went all in, studied the geology of different parts of Paris and other cities, mapped it against cancer rates. And he found something. Places with soil full of stuff that conducts electricity well, like clay and certain types of ores, they tended to have more cancer.
So just living in the wrong spot could mess with your cosmic ray intake and make you more likely to get cancer?
That was his thinking. He said these conductive soils, they're like a funhouse mirror for cosmic rays.
Oh, okay.
They distort how the energy flows and create interference that screws with our cells.
That's a bit freaky. But didn't he also say that local water and food could help?
Yeah, he noticed people in areas with low cancer, they often got their water from local sources like wells or springs, which would have the same electrical properties as the soil around them. So he thought, hey, maybe eating and drinking local keeps you in tune with your environment, and that could help counteract the bad vibes.
It's like an electromagnetic version of eating local and organic.
It's a cool connection. And it all comes back to Lakhovsky's belief in how interconnected everything is. We need to be in harmony with our surroundings, not just physically, but on an energy level too.
It really makes you think about how we're living now, you know? All this concrete and technology.
It does.
Maybe we've lost touch with some of those subtle energies that Lakhovsky was so focused on.
Maybe we have.
Okay, so, wow. We've gone through a lot with Lakhovsky. Cells being like tiny circuits, cosmic rays giving us energy, and how all that getting disrupted could lead to all sorts of problems, even cancer. But one thing that really stuck with me is his take on how the very first cell, like, popped into existence.
Definitely a mind bender, that's for sure. A real blend of science and, like, cosmic poetry.
So how did he imagine it happening? Like, life coming from non-life?
Okay, so Lakhovsky's picturing this primordial Earth billions of years ago. Water everywhere, all these elements just floating around, but they're ionized, right? Electrically charged. And of course, those cosmic rays are bombarding everything.
Got it.
So he's saying, over a really, really long time, these elements start arranging themselves, almost like magnets, following these electrical lines of force.
So electricity was like the conductor, bringing the ingredients for life together.
Exactly. And he's picturing these conducting molecules that gradually form these filaments. And then over time, those get wrapped up in insulating membranes. He even thought the Earth spinning had something to do with it, helping those filaments get all coiled up.
Okay, so now we've got this like protocell structure, but when does it actually become alive?
Well, Lakhovsky thought there was a specific moment where this non-living thing crossed over, so to speak, when the circuit was complete and the filament could finally oscillate freely, powered by those cosmic waves. That, to him, was the birth of the first cell.
Man, that's a pretty powerful image. It makes you wonder, what was it like to be that first cell, waking up to the universe for the first time? But I gotta say, it's still kind of hard to wrap my head around how something so tiny, vibrating with so little energy, could kickstart, like, all life on Earth.
Right. It seems impossible almost. But that's where Lakhovsky's obsession with resonance comes in. Think about it. One cell, yeah, it's tiny, but there are trillions of cells in a living thing, all doing their thing together.
So it's like a chain reaction. Each cell amplifies the others.
More like a choir. Each voice on its own might be quiet, but together they create this huge, powerful sound. And don't forget, Lakhovsky believes cells are tuned in to specific frequencies from those cosmic rays.
Right.
So it's like finding the right station on your radio. Even a weak signal, if you're tuned in just right, it comes through loud and clear.
Wow, that's a really good analogy. Makes you wonder, with all the electromagnetic noise we're surrounded by these days, have we lost some of that connection to those subtle energies that Lakhovsky thought were so important?
It's a good question. And Lakhovsky would have been fascinated by it, that's for sure. He knew electromagnetic fields could be both good and bad, remember? Those carcinogenic soils.
Oh yeah, makes you think twice about where you're living or even just hanging out. But as cool as Lakhovsky's ideas are, some of them are still, you know, pretty out there, even for today.
Definitely. Like those soils, more research is needed to see if there's really something to it. But his observations about cancer rates and geology, those are definitely worth a closer look.
And what about, like, eating local to stay in tune with your environment? That's pretty far out there, too.
It is, but he makes you think, right?
Right.
Maybe there's something to this idea of staying connected to the natural rhythms of the world around us. Not just physically, but in terms of energy and frequency, too.
It's like, in our rush to be all high-tech and modern, we've forgotten some of those basic connections to the natural world. Connections that Lakhovsky seemed to just get instinctively.
Maybe we have. But whether or not you buy into every single one of his theories, you can't deny. Lakhovsky really makes you think differently about life, health, and how it all fits into the big picture of the universe.
So, bottom line, was Lakhovsky a genius ahead of his time or just like too out there for mainstream science?
I think it's a bit of both. He definitely challenged the status quo, went way out on a limb with some of his ideas.
Yeah.
And people didn't always get it. But the more we learn about how life works on an electromagnetic level, the more relevant his work becomes.
It's like he planted these seeds and now they're finally starting to sprout.
Exactly. And who knows what other secrets he might have uncovered if he had access to the tech we have today.
It really makes you wonder, but even if some of his specific ideas haven't totally held up, those core principles about oscillation, resonance, and how everything's connected, they're more important now than ever.
Absolutely. It's a good reminder that sometimes the most mind-blowing ideas, they're the ones that sound the craziest at first. Lakhovsky's Secret of Life, maybe it doesn't have all the answers, but it definitely opens up a whole new way of looking at things.
Yeah, it's a perspective that makes you think and keeps you curious. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the world of Georges Lakhovsky. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning.